The nation's top Navy man, Admiral Bourda, dies of a gunshot. Apparently, it is suicide. As the recovery of the wreckage from Flight 592 picks up pace, the head of ValueJet defends Discount Airlines as safe and effective. NBC News in depth. Dan Rostenkowski now reports he has prostate cancer as he prepares to go to prison. And the fleecing of America. Surplus American military weapons given away. A big beneficiary, the NRA.
From NBC News, this is NBC Nightly News with Tom Brokaw.
Good evening. What has been a difficult couple of years for the U.S. Navy just got a lot worse. The Chief of Naval Operations, the Navy's top officer, Admiral Jeremy Mike Bourda, was found dead today of a gunshot wound to the chest. It appears to be suicide. It came as Newsweek was inquiring about the Admiral's military citations. Bourda rose from the ranks as an enlisted man to the Navy's top job, the first ever to do that. Today, President Clinton remembered him.
He was known for his professionalism and skill, but what distinguished him above all else was his unwavering concern for the welfare of the men and women who served the United States in our Navy. We will all remember him for that and much else.
The Navy is not yet officially calling this a suicide, and it is not commenting on Newsweek's announcement. It was working on a story about the Admiral's military citations. More now from NBC's Pentagon correspondent, Ed Rabel.
Late today, Newsweek magazine reported that Admiral Bourda was the subject of a forthcoming story calling into question his Vietnam combat decorations, which the Admiral had been wearing for years. Bourda's body was found in a side yard of his home here at the Washington Navy Yard, a military compound.
It is my sad duty to report to you that Admiral Mike Bourda, the Chief of Naval Operations, is dead.
Cause of death, a gunshot wound to the chest. Police and the Navy began an investigation. One senior Navy official called it an apparent suicide. The president learned of the incident when a note was passed to him while he was meeting with business leaders. He had appointed Bourda to the top Navy job in 1994.
Admiral Bourda was a sailor's sailor. At every stage of his career, he put the interests of sailors and their families first.
Bourda succeeded Admiral Frank Kelso as Chief of Naval Operations. He took charge of a Navy that was struggling to overcome the turmoil that had begun with the 1991 tailhook sexual assault scandal. On Bourda's watch, a series of serious flying accidents occurred, and the Naval Academy was struggling with its own scandals, ranging from drug use to car theft.
I could not imagine circumstances which Admiral Bourda, who had been well-tested in war and in peace, would bring about such a situation as this.
Late today, reports emerged that Admiral Bourda stormed out of a morning meeting here at the Pentagon, pushing his driver aside and driving himself home. And a senior defense official confirms for NBC News that Admiral Bourda was the target of forthcoming news stories that would raise questions about his right to wear Vietnam combat medals on his uniform. Ed Rabel, NBC News, the Pentagon.
Recently, Admiral Bourda spoke at the Naval Academy's graduation ceremonies, and he emphasized the role of leadership in dealing with the Academy's recent problems. One example now has an ironic ring to it. The Admiral at Annapolis, in his own words.
Every single person in the Navy should have one leader they look to and say, that person is responsible and accountable for me. We can institute, during my remaining 2 years as CNO, a no-nonsense, one-on-one leadership approach to this business. We will solve the majority of our problems. Can a sailor be a member of the Ku Klux Klan under those circumstances and not have the leader know it? No. Can the sailor be committing sexual harassment and not have the leader know it? No. Can the sailor commit suicide and not have the leader know that he or she was in distress? No. We cannot ignore things we must work on, and if we hide them, we do everybody a disservice.
Admiral Bourda gave that speech only 3 weeks ago. News of Bourda's death also overshadowed the president's announcement today on landmines which kill 20,000 each year, mostly civilians around the world. Under heavy pressure, The president decided against banning American use of landmines, instead of placing limits on just one type of mine, while calling for a permanent worldwide ban in the future. In the Florida Everglades, we're now on the 6th day of the tedious and frustrating business of trying to recover bodies and wreckage from the crash of ValueJet Flight 592. Some progress, but it's slow and it's hard. We begin tonight with NBC's Kerry Sanders.
On the surface, it still doesn't look like a jetliner crashed here. But today, search teams pinpointed in the sawgrass, beneath the water and the muck, 8 spots. There, they hooked a line attached to a helicopter, and the Everglades gave up the most significant parts yet of the DC-9's debris. Pulled from the site, sections of the fuselage and wings. On a nearby levee, salvagers laid out the pieces of the puzzle: 2 tires, a thrust reverser, major portions of the landing gear, and the jet's 2 engines.
Getting the engines and getting the tires were very high priorities for us.
Investigators want to know if the engines were still running when the plane crashed, and they want to know if 3 jet tires loaded as freight might have exploded.
They'll be decontaminated as quickly as we can and taken over to the hangar for expert examination.
Late today, divers found more human remains. 6 days after this crash, the search is beginning to take a toll on rescuers.
Emotionally, as a trained law enforcement officer, you just deal with it.
What search teams have not yet found out there is the cockpit voice recorder. Investigators believe the final seconds of what the pilots were talking about could explain what went wrong. Kerry Sanders, NBC News, the Everglades.
What caused that crash? That remains a mystery tonight. And what about discount airlines and safety? NBC's Robert Hager is still on the scene. He has more on those questions tonight. Robert?
Tom, the man who founded and built ValueJet fought back today after daily announcements of more and more government inspections, after news stories asking if ValueJet cut corners on safety. The airline's president, Louis Jordan, called in reporters. Jordan said low-cost airlines permit millions to fly who otherwise couldn't afford it. But he said now they're being frightened unfairly.
We have a lot of hysteria out in the industry right now. At this moment in time, for the people who are looking to determine should I just stay away from low-cost carriers, misinformation or rush to judgment is particularly concerning.
And what about the hazardous oxygen-generating canisters shipped as cargo on the plane which crashed? ValueJet wasn't authorized to ship hazardous cargo. But the airline said today it thought the canisters were empty because the shipping papers were filled out by another company, which does maintenance for ValueJet.
My preliminary briefing shows me that we had canisters on board the airplane that were designated as empty. If that information is correct, then we were not at fault.
Jordan displayed a copy of the shipping label marked empty. But the NTSB's investigator in charge wasn't so sure.
Some have characterized that they believed they were full or unused. Others believed that they were used.
The implication? Either it was an honest mistake or deceit. It's for investigators to determine. In spite of all the concern about oxygen generators, it's not clear they played a role in the accident. Unless that voice recorder is found and has breakthrough information, this could be a long and tough investigation.
Robert, the question tonight remains, however, what happens if they don't find that cockpit voice recorder?
Well, then you got to go for physical evidence. Now, there may be nothing on the voice recorder to start with, but in any event, you'd have to look for little pieces of wires, scorching, just where this fire began and what could have caused it.
All right, thanks very much. Robert Hager tonight, still at the site of the investigation. When NBC Nightly News continues, soon-to-be former Senator Bob Dole on the first day of the rest of his campaign.
Bob Dole is part of America, not part of some little group politicians inside the Beltway.
The born-again candidate hits the stump in the Midwest without his tie. How's he doing? We'll ask him next. Still ahead tonight, the fleecing of America, tens of millions of Army guns. You paid for them, and they're given away free.